Good morning. Welcome, everyone. We are so delighted to have you here to talk about the communication careers in museums and public spaces. I'm Dr. Julie Haynes. I am the director for the Center for the Advancement of Women in Communication at Rowan University. And we are an affiliate of the Lillian Lodge Copenhagen Center for the Advancement of Women in Communication at Florida International University. And we are very excited to say that Dr. Copenhagen is in attendance with us this morning. So we are thrilled to have her. And in fact, I am very proud to be able to announce today that Dr. Copenhagen, who is a 1962 Glassboro State alumna, has just been named the 2020 recipient of Rowan University's Lifetime Service Award. This award honors an alumnus of Rowan University, alumna or alumnus, who has graduated at least 50 years ago and has demonstrated significant service to Rowan University and the community. This award is intended to recognize longevity and consistency of service over a lifetime of dedication to the university, as well as to her personal and professional communities. Dr. Copenhagen's award will be presented at the virtual Golden Profs reunion on Thursday, May 20th. And for more information on potentially attending that or to find out more about the award, we will put the link in our chat box down there. So for those of you who know Dr. Copenhagen or who have worked with her either for a long time or for just a little bit of time, you will know how very well deserving this award is. She is a true visionary, and so please help me in congratulating Dr. Copenhagen on this very significant and prestigious award.
Oh, thank you so much, Julie. I really appreciate that. And thank you all for joining us here today for this wonderful workshop that we have coming up. But I just wanted to say that I got my start at Rowan, which was then Glassboro State College before the name change. And my career started there and I've been going ever since. And we are so honored at FIU to have this affiliate center at Rowan. And with the wonderful work that Julie and Sandy and Karen are doing to bring these programs to young women and to encourage and empower young women to move ahead. That's our mission. And so I'm proud to be receiving this award from Rowan next month, but also proud to be able to say that we have a center at Rowan as well. And I know that through your leadership, Julie, it's going to do great things. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Copenhagen.
You're muted, Julie.
I think Karen muted me. We're really thrilled to have you here today with us and to be able to offer you this award and recognize you in this way. So thank you so much. And it really is because of Dr. Copenhagen's vision and her hard work and dedication that we're able to bring you programming like we have today. And so today I am thrilled to introduce.
May I jump in for just a second?
Oh, absolutely, Sandy.
I would also like to offer my congratulations to Lillian. And I can recall the day that this is why you are so deserving of this award. I recall the day when you were here on campus for another event and you reached out to me and said, hey, did you ever think about starting a center for women in advancement of women in communication here at Rowan? And I said, no, but let's make it happen. And we did. So we are all here today, thanks to Lillian. And these events have been energizing. So I am really thrilled to be able to take part in another one of these. And I do want to also thank Julie for all the leadership she's shown, because this is, a year ago, this didn't exist. So, I mean, we got tremendous things going on here. So thanks to everyone.
Thank you. I think, Sandy, it's very kind of you to say. Sometimes I think Sandy wants me to not be so enthusiastic of like, Sandy, we need some money. Sandy, come to this. But I really appreciate it. I know he is really super supportive of all of it. So Sandy, I really appreciate all of your support of the initiatives as well. So again, I'm so excited about this event, talking about communication careers in museums and public spaces. My background, as I did my undergrad, I was in American Studies and Speech Communication major. And so I worked in museums both in high school and college. And so I see the connections quite easily, but I think a lot of people don't necessarily see those. And so it's a really wonderful opportunity. And we have some really remarkable speakers with us today. I really don't think I can exaggerate how significant they are in their field. So I'm going to introduce both of the speakers, and then after I introduce them, they'll give you an introduction into how they got into the field, how communication helps them, those sorts of things. And then we will have a question and answer period. And so please feel free to type your questions in the chat. We've also got some questions beforehand, and we will try to get to everyone's questions if we can. So our first speaker is Vonda Gibbons. Vonda serves as the executive director of the Stickley Mueseum at Craftsman Farms, which is an early 20th century historic house museum and National Historic Landmark in Parsippany, New Jersey. She's a regular contributor of artsandcraftscollector.com and the National Arts and Crafts Conference. And she was recently interviewed for the documentary Gustav Stickley, American Craftsman. And if you haven't seen that, I've sent the trailer to a bunch of people because it's so delightful and a really lovely documentary. So do try to check that out. She is a museum educator at heart, and she has been a docent for 21 years and previously served as the director of education at the Stickley Museum and the Hunterdon Art Museum. She holds 2 degrees in communication, a bachelor's from Lipscomb University in her home state of Tennessee, and a master's from Texas A&M University. Welcome, Vonda. And Julissa Marenco is the Smithsonian Institution's Assistant Secretary for Communications and External Affairs and the Chief Marketing Officer. She has oversight of public affairs, government relations, special events, and visitor services. She provided leadership to the institution's American History's Women's Initiative and represented the institution as a federal commissioner on the Women's Suffrage Centennial Commission. Previously, she served as Chief External Affairs Officer and Senior Advisor at the FCC, as president of Telemundo's largest affiliate television group, ZGS Communication Station Group. In 2007, she was selected by the President of the United States to serve as White House Fellow. And following her undergraduate studies at Rowan, well, I shouldn't say, we're not going to date people, but she was a radio, television, and film major. She could tell you what year if she'd like. But following her undergraduate studies at Rowan, she earned her master's degree at Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government. As I said, we cannot underestimate the power of the speakers today. Really impressive. And we're honored that they have graciously agreed to spend time with us and tell us a little bit about their careers. So Vonda, if you wouldn't mind discussing your pathway a little bit for us.
So you want me to talk a little bit how I came into the museum field?
Sure.
Yeah, there's a couple of different ways I could tell this story. So the simplest way is to say that I went to undergrad with and got a communications degree, and then went off to graduate school in Texas A&M, and got a graduate degree. I thought I was on a path to doing what Dr. Haynes is doing, is being a professor. And I did do that briefly. I was at sort of the full-time professor level for a while. At my alma mater in Tennessee. Then my husband wanted to go to graduate school. He had supported my time in grad school, so we moved to New Jersey. And I had a career change after I moved to New Jersey and ended up working in museums, and started really with whatever jobs I could get, and slowly moved into the position of executive director of Historic House Museum, which was not exactly on my radar, something I was going to end up doing. I guess just in terms of authenticity, I would say the second way to tell the story is that I ended up in New Jersey because of my husband's career, really struggled at first with that decision, that move, and was lost for a while. Realized I had a job in college as a docent at a historic house museum that I had loved, and it led me back into the field, a field I had never really considered as a long-term career. I worked odd jobs until I could get a full-time job in a museum. And you know, it's not easy to change careers, and it's not easy. There are times in your life where it seems like there are challenges that you don't know how to overcome. And sometimes it ends up being the great thing that happens to you, because it makes you stop and reset and turn in a different direction. So I'm really grateful now in hindsight to have been working in the field for, I realized this morning it's been almost 20 years. So it seems like a long time. But that's how I got into the museum field, really from a job that I had as an undergrad that I loved, and thought this is when I was sort of struggling in my life, let me go back to something I know I love, and it really has paid off.
Julissa, would you like to speak to that question as well, or any other observations that you want to make? And I appreciate that.
Sure. Hi, good morning, everybody. It's great to be here. Thank you both, Julie, for the invitation, and Lillian, congratulations on your award. I would be remiss to not start by saying how Rowan proud I am, and so I had to bring my Rowan gear to the party here. I'm a proud alumnus, as those folks who know me know very well. Similar to Vonda, there's so many ways to tell this story. I would say if anyone who knew me while I was at Rowan would be the first to tell you how much I was a poster board child for Rowan and for the communications, radio, television, film program. I can't imagine what it would have been like to have a center like this while I was there as an undergrad, and I'm pretty certain I would have been a pain to Julie because I would have been there every day. And so, at Rowan, I studied communications, radio, television, film. Anyone who knew me knew I wanted to work in television. Specifically, I wanted to work in Spanish language television. It was something that I wanted to do. Spanish was my first language, and so I had an affinity for the language and for programming. And so I wanted to go and do that after college. And so sure enough, I had an opportunity to go work in Spanish language television early on in my career. After graduating from Rowan, I went to New York City, worked in English language television, then transitioned to Spanish language media. Spent the bulk of my career, a little bit over 16 years in different capacities, eventually leading to running a station in Washington, D.C., which is where I'm based. And then after that, running a group of stations. I will tell you that at the time, if you would have told me that I would be part of the leadership team at the Smithsonian or working in museums or any kind of interest in museums, I would not have believed you. I love museums. I love the spaces. I love what they do. But my relationship with the Smithsonian and with museums was really limited to family comes to town, we go to the museums. There's an event or something fun to do, you go to the museums. Again, as there are many ways, I'm sure we'll talk about this, there's no linear path, if you will. Museums were something that were in my background. And so I was recruited to work at the Smithsonian. And at first I didn't quite get why their interest was in me from a perspective of having not worked in museums. But then I quickly learned throughout the interview process, as I got to learn more about the institution and really kind of got excited about the position and the organization, I quickly learned how much similarities there are between television and museums, if you will. And I would invite you just from an analogous relationship, right? In television, we have the reporters that are telling the stories. In museums, we have the curators that are telling the stories. And we all both know how very important it is who tells those stories, how they tell those stories, and through which lenses. And so there was very much an analogous relationship between the both that I could see. And they both had, from a communications perspective, the need for how do we tell those stories? How do we reach different audiences? A lot of the skill set was easily analogous and able to be translated to the respective industry. So I've been at the Smithsonian now for a little bit over 3 years. In this capacity, I have oversight of communications, marketing, and a couple of other different areas. But my path actually into TV and communications, what I would encourage most students to think about this, was very much an unexpected path in the sense that my goal was to work, as I mentioned, my goal was to work in Spanish language television. That's what I wanted to do. And there were so many ways that one can get into Spanish language television, but my first job in Spanish language television was probably the most unattractive, unexciting job I ever had, which was in research. And it was not something that I thought I would ever have an interest in, right? If you want to work in television, usually you think about the glamorous side of it. At Rowan, I spent quite a bit of time with Ned Eckhart in documentaries, in productions, Mike Donovan. I was WGLS every other day. And so I was very interested in the content and the storytelling side of it. And so to be offered a job to work in research was kind of like, not exciting. Fast forward, one of the best experiences of my life. And it was a door that opened many other doors. So I'll pause there, Julie.
Thank you so much. And I really appreciate how you talked about this storytelling element. And I know that one of the ways, and Sandy can back me up on this, one of the ways we describe our college is a storytelling college. You know, we tell stories. So I think that that's really important. And in my classes, we actually do, I teach a lot of classes like rhetorical criticism, and we talk about museums and public spaces and how they tell stories. So that's, and the curators and whose stories get told, whose stories get left out. So really fascinating. I wondered if both of you could talk a little bit about, so thank you for that, about your pathways, and also thank you so much for your transparency and your honesty about that sometimes it didn't work out the way you thought, or you might have been a little lost, because I think it's important for our students to hear that. But can you talk a little bit about how your degrees or communication generally help you sort of in your day-to-day jobs? And related to that, I think a lot of students are really curious about what does a day-to-day job look at the day at the museum.
So the thing about having a communications degree in the museum field is that I've not found it to be typical. And also because I came into it kind of sideways, I didn't prepare to do this. But I find it, I say this all the time, I find it really helpful to have a communications degree. So I think if you have a communications degree and you think you want to go to work in a museum, it may be on you to kind of make the case for why it's valuable. It's so cool that Julissa was recruited, because I didn't necessarily find that there was an understanding of what my background could bring to the table. Because typically a museum educator is going to have background in art or in education, and I didn't have either. In my current phase of my career, I do a lot of fundraising, and I had a great course in undergraduate, my undergraduate degree in persuasion with a teacher named Paul Prill, who was just so influential in my life. And then later I taught that class, and I literally use it all the time. and one of the main ideas related to communication is that you think about who your audience is first. Whoever you're preparing a message for, you think first about who it's for, and you shape that message around it. And I do that all the time. It's fundamental. It seems obvious, but I see people do it all the time who don't do that. And I did a presentation on Tuesday evening for the town council of Parsippany, who own this property. We rerun it in, the museum has a partnership with the municipality to run the site and to make sure it's open to the public. And we had a severe damage to a building on the property last year. So I needed to make a presentation asking for $1.5 million towards that project. So, I find myself, so that's a different kind of audience than somebody who is interested in Stickley because they're a collector. So I find that I spend a lot of time thinking about who is listening, what their interests are, trying to think about what might compel them to be interested. But gosh, communications in fundraising is everything. You can learn basic things about fundraising from taking a class, but if you don't have authenticity in your messaging, I just don't think it works. So I find it to be really helpful, but again, a little not the typical route that people see. So if it's something you want to get into, you may want to anticipate that, and then be able to explain how your career path can be useful to the museum. In terms of my day-to-day work, one of the great things about working in museums, if you're like me, is that there's no typical day. It's different every day. I tend to like that. I don't know what it means to be bored at work. But generally speaking, most of my time is spent on preserving buildings and property in some form. There are 9 buildings here, 9 original buildings. They are old buildings. Whether it's an old building or new building, you're never done with maintenance. And there's a lot of fundraising that goes in with maintaining buildings. And the other part of it is just running a museum and overseeing staff. Our annual budget is $500,000. We do not have an endowment. And so a big part of my job is raising $500,000 annually to make sure that we meet our budget. I certainly don't do that alone, but there is a lot of pressure in doing that. And then everything else, because it's a small museum, I do HR, human resources stuff, budgeting, The great thing about working in this kind of job is that you really fully utilize every skill you know you have, but it has really pushed me to bring up skills I didn't think I had that I wasn't very good at, or to find somebody who could help me. It really is often humbling and good for you to have to go find somebody else who knows something more than you do and say, I need you to help me figure this out. So it's different every day, and there's a lot of challenges, but at the end of the day, I really love working at a place that I think is important historically. I think that what Craftsman Farms and what Stickley meant in his time is still really important and valuable today, and being able to share that message with people, it means a lot with me, and even in the hard days, it still means a lot.
Wonderful. Before we get to Julissa, Dean Tweedy just put in the chat, and it's true that our fundraisers at Rowan, almost all are communication majors, and there's quite a few, not to toot my own horn, but lots of former students on here that work in, I see Melissa was here and Chris. So it's obviously really, really useful for fundraising to know about the rhetorical situation and audiences and all of that. Julissa, how about you?
You know, I actually, in my respective capacity, just to echo your point, you know, we work very closely. I work very closely, you know, hand in hand with the Office of Advancement at the institution from a fundraising perspective, and communications is across the board. So I would echo that sentiment just the same. You know, when I reflect upon my time at Rowan from a communications degree perspective, there are certain elements, the base. One of the things I always tell students is you've got to get the base right? You've got to have a strong base. And at Rowan, I would say, from a writing perspective, my writing skills in communications in different settings, especially now in a museum world, right? To Vonda's point, we are looking to see how we tell those stories, crafted those stories, and framing those stories to different audiences. And so from a writing perspective, the basics have to be there, but you also have to hone those skills. I would argue from a writing and communications perspective, it's a never ending process, right? And you continue to hone those skills, and you continue to work on those skills in every part of communications element that you have for writing specifically to different audiences. I think irrespective of career, whether it's in positions like the ones that we are, having strong writing skills will equate and will help you irrespective of career or position. Because as you can imagine, everything that we do, especially now, from email communications to presentations to writing, you know, proposals for folks to be sponsors, to writing text for exhibits, if you will, everything at the end of the day, you have to be able to be concise. You have to be able to frame a message. You have to be able to make that message then resonate with your respective intended target audience. And so first and foremost, I think the degree helped me to understand that, but also helped me hone my writing skills coming from high school into the college environment. Similarly speaking, on the radio, television, and film end of it, the production element of it, where, you know, as I mentioned earlier, I was pretty involved with production classes, content generation, right? Present day, more and more in any respective capacity that you're in, whether you're in television, whether you're in museum, we are all developing content. We are all content providers in our own way. If we look across our social media thread, right? We're putting out content. In these fields, you are constantly telling those stories, creating the content through different mediums, right? Whether that's on social media, whether that's in video, or whether it's straight, in television, you are creating content. So that storytelling element, the ability to craft that project management element, seeing content creation from the beginning in the design and the concept, through fruition, through the final product, extremely important, irrespective of career, I might argue, just because the sheer project management skills that are needed and necessary when developing content for television or for any other aspect, it's quite important. The ability to be able to see something from beginning to end through fruition, that content development, I think is especially important. So I would argue that the value that a communications degree brings you, it makes you a stronger writer, stronger communications, stronger content development, better understanding of audiences. But I would also add just sheer project management, being able to manage multiple efforts at any given time, right? Being able to have sheer project management of operations, if you will, just because you're able to kind of create, develop, and concept and present. And that's translatable to any industry.
That's wonderful. And I see in our chat the director of our planetarium on campus was just echoing your discussion about writing and doing things like grant projects, and even small things like thank you letters is super important. What about Julissa, your day-to-day activities? What does your day-to-day life look at the Smithsonian?
I echo the former sentiment. Every day is different. I think that's what keeps it exciting. I think that's what challenges you differently. I have oversight of a couple of different departments for the institution, for the big brand. On any given day, I'm doing a lot of writing, doing a lot of messaging, framing a lot of messaging, both for internal audiences as well as external audiences. So just the sheer element of communications is a big part of it. Public affairs, engaging with the media relations. The definition of media relations has changed throughout my career. And I would argue in a museum setting, it's important to have those relationships with the media, because not only are you presenting exhibits, presenting collections, talking about what's coming up, but then additionally, so you have a relationship with the media for when things might not go that well, right? So from a crisis communications perspective, we spend a lot of time on different types of crises, addressing them, trying to get out in front of them, trying to plan for them, if you will. A lot of time spent reviewing, potential future exhibitions, if you will, to try to better understand what possibilities might exist that could be somewhat controversial. In the art world, there tends to be at times different thoughts of opinions as to, exhibits, presentations, if you will. So spent a lot of times in the crisis communication space, spent a lot of times in marketing and branding. The Smithsonian is a 175-year organization. We're very lucky. We do not have brand recognition issues, right? People know the Smithsonian, they love the Smithsonian, it's a revered brand. However, I might argue when you have a legacy brand like the Smithsonian, it's even more important to focus on the marketing and branding. There's a lot of elements of the institution that people do not know. One of the things that I'm charged with is our institution is 19 museums, libraries, research centers. A lot of people don't know that, right? So how do we increase the relevance of the institution? How do we market and brand some of our efforts, some of our initiatives to new audiences in different ways? How do we share what we're doing? In my intro, you mentioned I was part of the Women's Suffrage Centennial Commission. Last year, we celebrated 100 years of the suffrage movement. And so that was a key moment for the country. Unfortunately, it was a little bit overshadowed because of the pandemic, but that was a key moment for the country, the celebration of 100 years of women and their right to vote. The Smithsonian as the leader and the keeper of our national treasures and telling our history, this is an important moment for us to be able to market and brand this moment, not just for the country, but for the institution. So it varies. It varies on any given day. I would be remiss not to mention that in addition to what I call, what I love, right? The creative part, the day-to-day, the nuts and bolts of communications and the other capacities that I oversee. I'd be remiss not to mention that, there's also management of people and overseeing people and leading teams. And I think both Vonda and I would agree, if not for our leadership and or management skills, we probably wouldn't be able to move up, not just in this field, but in all different fields. So leading teams, managing people across the board is a big part of my day-to-day, just the same.
I'm so glad that you mentioned about your brand too, because as you were speaking, I was thinking about that. And I wondered if maybe Vonda or both of you could speak to that a little bit more, because what's fascinating, a lot of organizations want to build their brand up, but as you said, the Smithsonian and Stickley, those are beloved. I mean, it's not just a well-known brand, right? Like, people are obsessed with the Smithsonian. They are obsessed. I don't think that's too strong of a word, right? They're obsessed with Stickley. Like, if you love Stickley, you love. And then there's really interesting scholarship done on sort of this notion of the secular sacred places that we have in America. And that's a secular but sacred place to many people, the Smithsonian. So I didn't know if you wanted to speak any more to that, about how you negotiated that, or again, I just want to know some more of your thoughts. Julissa's talked a little bit, but go ahead.
It comes, I'm sure Vonda would agree, it comes with great responsibility, right? Being a trusted brand is most certainly an advantage, but being a trusted brand also means you're held to a higher standard. I talked a little bit about crisis communications. When something goes wrong, there's a greater level for disappointment. And so there's a lot of preservation. There's a lot of, one of the things I tell students all the time is you need to be able to hone your skills to anticipate all different kinds of scenarios. And the better you anticipate all different kinds of scenarios, the better you can be prepared. And I would argue at the Smithsonian, and I think Vonda would agree, when you're charged with keeping treasures that the public have a sense of ownership over to some degree. And in our case, they do, right? Where 2/3 of our budget is federally mandated. So taxpayer dollars are what's covering 2/3 of our budget. So it is the public's treasures. There's a huge sense of ownership of that. And so your marketing, your branding efforts to ensure that people have an understanding of what the institution and what these museums and what these public spaces are bringing to you, the individual, now more than ever, right? These are trusted institutions. And there's a lot of folks that have lost trust in some of our most important, whether it's business, government, whatever it may be, but these are trusted institutions. And so how you market and brand to your audiences and how you ensure that they are engaged is extremely important.
Vonda, did you want to add to that? Because I know that people, and in your case, it's kind of interesting, right? Because it seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but people either don't know who Stickley is at all, or they just adore Stickley. So if you could talk a little bit about that. And maybe for some of our students, they might not actually know who Stickley is. So if you could mention that real quickly.
Sure. Yes, I probably should have covered that earlier. I apologize for that. Yeah, I do find that if I'm, say, at a cocktail party, that there's a 50-50 chance that the person will either be like, never heard of Stickley, or, oh my God, Stickley. And so it kind of goes either way. Gustav Stickley was a American designer of home furnishings. He's most known for furniture today, but he lived in the early 20th century. He's generally associated with New York and New York State, upstate New York. But he built his dream home, for lack of a better way of putting it, in New Jersey in 1910, 1911, lived here for a few years. And then World War I started, he got and his businesses began to suffer, and he didn't get to stay here very long. But there has been, these things tend to go in, design styles tend to go in cycles, and like every 40 years there's sort of a resurgence of styles. So if you've heard of Craftsman style, Mission style, that's all Stickley. And Craftsman style I've definitely seen make a comeback in the last few years, and it's more and more common to see it in places like Home Depot, that there's a row of Craftsman style lanterns, that sort of thing. So I came into this, I came to work with a director. I didn't know anything about Stickley. So if you don't know anything about Stickley, that's okay with me. So that's one of the things that helps in building a brand, is that I came to this, really without knowing much. I loved contemporary art, which is one of the reasons I got into working in museums. And so decorative arts were not on my radar. I was recruited by the former executive director, and I came to work with her. And she offered me the opportunity to build a program from scratch. And, that's kind of cool. So I thought, yeah, I'll do that. And it was really, really hard work, but that's where I started. But by the time I became executive director, so I worked as the education director, started at that point, there had been programs previously, but there'd been this long lapse where there really wasn't anyone doing that. So I started, basically, I did all of the programs and started everything. And it's incredible learning experience, because you're just like throwing darts at the wall and seeing you just don't know it's going to work. By the time I became executive director, I really knew this place, and I really knew the audience. Now, that doesn't mean to say I'm always trying to expand it. I wish all of you knew Stickley, but the whole, I really understood kind of the makeup of what compelled people to pay attention and what made people interested, and generally who our core audience was and who we might be able to recruit. And for me as the executive director, there's been a lot of building the brand around that. And one of the great things about, one of the advanced questions I got was about, the digital world. One of the great things about social media is that for free, you can sort of play around with building your brand and see what works and connects with people. And that's been a great thing for small museums to be able to utilize websites, e-blasts, and social media to be able to develop a voice and to do more than just be, this place is truly sacred to many people. And so that is an important part of my job, to maintain this place and to make sure that when people visit, it is as much as they dreamed of it being. But being able to exist in the digital world is also important. And so that's been a real big part of building the brand over the last few years, especially.
That's a great segue too for some of the questions I know we've gotten about social media and about how both museums and or your jobs had to pivot during the pandemic. I wondered if you could both speak about sort of the challenges and maybe, things that happened that were positive. I've talked about this a lot as the director of the center. It's been really challenging to launch a center during the pandemic, but also I have people from, Julissa was able to make it, Vonda, like everybody from different parts of the country. So, but if you could talk about your museums and your jobs and how they pivoted during the pandemic, that'd be great.
Sure. Well, as you can imagine, right, the beauty of going to a museum, of being able to learn, right, to engage, to see objects, to see artifacts, is in person, right? That's something that it's a significant pivot, right? But when people think of spending a day at a museum, they're usually looking to learn, they're curious, they're usually looking to probably, have a day of reflection, if you will, depending upon subject matter. And so very, very hard, right? One day we were open, Friday, March 13th of 2020, we made the decision, okay, we need to close. Fast forward, how do you then, from that moment, from that day, when our doors are open, people are coming in, how do we continue to keep people engaged? Extremely hard, extremely challenging for sure. I think that the benefit of this pandemic has been exactly what we are right now, right? We're on a Zoom, we're on digital communications. We've all gotten somewhat more comfortable being in front of cameras from our homes, with our children, with our dogs, with the mailman coming in. We've all found some kind of a balance, or at least it looks like we have. I don't know. But I will tell you that for the museum world, one of the things that we quickly saw and learned, we had already been focused on being a digital first organization, right? We had already, realized that we needed to be developing our digital assets. But the opportunity that is created by the pandemic and this digital world is that, at least in my respective capacity now, in order to visit the museum, you don't have to go to the National Mall in Washington, D.C. And one of the things that the Smithsonian is keenly aware of, that I'm keenly aware of, is that not everyone will have that opportunity. You're lucky if you can, and if you do, I was lucky to be able to travel to the Smithsonian as a child. I have great photos of me at the Smithsonian, right? But I lived in New Jersey. It was a drive away. But we're very cognizant of the child that lives in Texas or the child that lives in Ohio and maybe might not be able to make that drive. And what the digital world affords us, it really creates accessibility, right? And it really creates an opportunity for people to see objects and artifacts and see the stories online. Again, nothing will replace that museum experience, but simultaneously to be able to spark that curiosity and that intrigue in a child digitally has been just a tremendous opportunity. And so we quickly pivoted. We were already very digitally focused, but now obviously at a more accelerated pace. And as you can imagine, right, necessity is the mother of invention, right? So in a quick pace, I dare say we're probably doing better and stronger digitally than we probably would have done had the pandemic not happened, right? There's nothing like urgency to make you really kind of redirect and pivot. And so what it's done for us, it's allowed us to focus heavily on our educational tools, right? All of a sudden you were at home, you were teaching your kid as a parent, as a caregiver, teachers were looking for tools, curriculum, efforts, especially free and accessible, that they could turn to. So it allowed us to focus heavily on education, both digitally and not digitally, because we still have to remember that there are homes that are still not, the digital divide is a real thing, right? There are still homes that don't have digital access. And so honing in on our educational efforts was a top priority for us. Simultaneously, at the same time, was creating programming. And similarly to you, we've created programs and have had people join programs that probably wouldn't have been able to join because they weren't near Washington, D.C. And so it's allowed us to broaden our aspects. I know for me, one of our charges has been, this will help us be truly a global institution, right? Beyond the borders of the US.
That's terrific. And I definitely want to hear from you, Vonda. I just wanted to jump in though, because I just was thinking the magnitude of closing, because like you said at the beginning, people think of the Smithsonian Institution sometimes as maybe their favorite. Like I love the, American history. So I picture that, but there's 19. So you had to close or figure out what to do with 19 spaces, which had to have been not you personally, but you.
And as Vonda indicated earlier, right, in her career, like she's had to deal with facilities and buildings, right? And there's one thing I'll tell you, closing a building in one day and opening it up, is not as easy. It's not as easy as you think. I think in my mind, sure, we just open the building, we just turn it off, right? No big deal. It is not as easy as one would think. I think Vonda can speak to that.
Vonda, thank you, Julissa.
I want to, yeah, it is. One of my colleagues is on the line, and she probably was here on the last day that we were open. She's in visitor services, and I said, well, it'll be a couple of weeks. We'll come back. We'll revisit this in 2 weeks, and you just have no idea. And one of the big responsibilities now is that every day we do building checks, because we're just not in the buildings in the way we were. So in old buildings, they deteriorate by lack of paying attention. So it's a constant part of the job and just trying to train the staff to pay attention. So it's a whole different thing, but it's definitely a weird place to be in, where I have visited the building way more than anyone else in the last, year or so. But I did want to come back to what COVID has done. I think for a lot of museums, it's going to be this important marker in our timeline of our organization, that it was like pre-COVID, after COVID, because it's been monumental, the shift. We had talked about doing more some online programs, but really hadn't gotten serious about them. And it's just similar, like, well, we had to get real serious because we're not bringing in admissions income anymore. We have a shop. The shop needed to shift more to being online, and also our visitor services had to go from being on-site visitor services. They really shifted entirely to doing social media, and they kind of created their own team that ran everything we did on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest, and really worked on connecting with people in other ways since we couldn't do it here. We started offering programs online in April, and one of the weird things about this facility is that it's a small museum that has national exposure. That's not really typical in my experience, but it brings an international audience. And one of the things that I really learned from this experience of offering classes and programs the way they were embraced so incredibly was that people want more than a one-time visit. And I'm sure that's definitely true of the Smithsonian too, that you think about historic house, you've seen it. But this really told me that there was people who wanted a community. They wanted more than just a visit. And so we did 31 weeks of a decorative arts classes in 2020. They're still going strong. We had a class last week that had 65 people in it. We did a birthday party for Gustav Stickley at the home of a descendant last month, and there were 90 people in that. So I don't really see this going away. We'll do sort of a hybrid experience so we can continue to engage the audience. There are people all over the country, in Canada and England, who are regularly tuning in, for lack of a better word, for this. And I expect it to continue. I doubt it will stop, but it will really fundamentally change our operations. That's what I really expect. The jury's still out a little bit. We're still learning, but so far there has not been a retreat from this kind of program if it's the right program that people want. And that's important to how you plan and how you schedule and knowing what people are interested in. But so far we haven't seen any change in interest level.
And that's great too, because your organization is dependent on funding as well. I know there's lots of fundraising that goes on in the Smithsonian Institution, so I don't want to take away from that, but there's, as you said, you have to raise your budget every year. So making sure that I'm sure that's important. And it's amazing. I was emailing Vonda last night and I told her I was looking at the registrant list for this, and we have people from Florida and Missouri and Texas and Michigan and obviously New Jersey and Pennsylvania. It's just people all over. And I see that Jenny Drumgoole is one of our photography professors, art professors here. And I know she's been having Zoom calls with people from overseas. And so it's really an amazing opportunity, I think, to get more people involved. I did want to shift a little bit and ask you, like Dr. Copenhaver was asking you at the top of the hour, what your experiences have been as a woman in the field, as a woman in leadership, if you found there to be certain challenges, if you have not found challenges in that, and not just as a woman, but maybe as an underrepresented member of a minority. So could you speak to that if you don't mind?
Sure, I'm happy to. So I've been the only woman in many rooms, many meetings, many boardrooms, many jobs, especially in leadership position. I've been the only, I'm Latina, I'm first generation Hispanic American. I've been the only, Hispanic minority in different rooms, in different capacities. I have always thought, of myself, looking to see, one of the things that I've kind of learned early on in my respective career was that irrespective of who I was, be it, from gender, from minority, from different aspects of my life, I really wanted to ensure that what I was judged on was my work. And I very, very quickly learned two things. One was the sheer level of preparation needed in order to move up in a respective career or move up in a respective industry. It's, I always tell students, there really isn't a shortcut. And I know that's very simplistic, but if there was someone who's going to figure out a shortcut, I'm pretty sure it was me, because I would have tried to find it. There really isn't a shortcut, unfortunately. And so the hard work element and the level of preparation for anything and everything that you do has been, I think, the key. I always think success is a funny word, but I think it's been the key to the work that I've been able to do. I've often told people, irrespective of where you are in life and business and work, the level of preparation and the level of being able to be the most prepared person in the room will always help you and would always advance you. And that's hard because it's a lot of work. I tell people all the time, it's if there is a differentiator in life, I feel very strongly that the greatest equalizer is education. I'm extremely grateful to my time at Rowan. Again, being a first generation, I was first to go to college. My parents were not college educated. And so being a first generation, I had a deep appreciation for my time at Rowan. I soaked it all up as much as I could. So I really do believe it's the great equalizer. But then when you go into the workforce, all of that kind of, the person that you bring to, a meeting, to a company, to an organization, the proof is in the pudding. And so you got to do the work. It's hard work. No shortcuts. But you've got to be the person that comes prepared. You've got to be the person that comes heavy, as I like to say. And to me, that has helped whenever I've been in those rooms that I've been the only.
Thank you so much. Vonda, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, my first full-time job was as a communications professor at my alma mater in Lipscomb University. And I was the first woman in that department. And even to me, it seemed kind of surprising, but still, I was really proud of that. And it did feel like sort of a mantle to wear. And I ended up moving on from that. When I got into museums, I found that the places I've worked generally were run primarily by women. Even at the board level, there were a lot of women involved. So that has been more typical of my experience. But, and I mentioned this when we were preparing for this a week ago, that sometimes I'm blindsided when I kind of inadvertently am part of another profession comes into the work that I'm doing, where I find someone who is is not expecting a woman to be in my position. And that kind of thing, sometimes I'm like, oh, they didn't expect it to be me. And so sometimes I'm surprised when I find that I'm not being treated with or heard in the room, that sort of thing. But I have to say what Julissa said about, and it reminded me of something I wanted to say before, was you cannot underestimate the value of working on your writing skills and your speaking skills. Even if you're never making a presentation, you're going to be speaking to your boss in a meeting. Your ideas, you need to be able to articulate your ideas in the moment. And it's just, I can't overstate how valuable that is. So I had teachers who really helped me work on my writing skills, and I'm grateful to, they were really hard. They really pushed me, and I'm really grateful now that they did. And you know, I really work on my speaking skills. I really worked on it. And I think it's just really important, because one of my former boss used to say that opportunity was luck meeting preparation. You know, there's no substitute for hard work. And then opportunities open up for you, but you've got to put in the work. You've got to put in the work. And there's just nothing that substitutes that. It does help to think about what you want to do, what you want to be doing. And so you're not wasting your time on the stuff that you don't think you'll ever end up really using, but there's got to put in the work.
You know, and I would echo, and I don't mean to beat a dead horse, and I mean this very, very respectfully, but younger generations are losing a little bit of the importance of writing. And I see it. I see young women, I see young men, you know, straight out of college. And, you know, we're talking in text, we're talking in social media, right? We're somewhat being retrained that less is more. And which in some cases it is, but younger generations are losing that. I encourage you, like, write the 15-page paper, write it over and over again. Have someone critique your work. It is painful to have people critique your work. I still have people critiquing my work. I don't write a communication in my office that I don't have somebody else look at, and it always gets better. But you have to ensure that you hone those skills, because I'm seeing more with younger generations, less concerned, right? Because, you know, they'll Google it, and now I'm sounding old, which sounds horrible, right? But they'll Google it, or they can just copy and paste kind of thing. And sure, that is absolutely true. And that is absolutely the case. You can do that, but I mark my words, it will catch up with you. And it will only make you stronger. So again, not to beat a dead horse, but just because I'm seeing it with younger generations coming out of college, the less emphasis on the writing.
Yeah, I just want to add to that, as somebody who works with a lot of people and hires people, you're going to work with people of every generation. So your generation may not value writing. That's fine. That's going to evolve over time, but you need to be able to talk to every generation in the workforce. And so you want to think about that as, again, it's all about the audience, the message, and that goes for your day-to-day communication as well as when you're speaking to a large audience. So
I beat the dead horse. You know, I will tell you, and my staff, they know very well, I require, if there's something that I need an overview of, it's a one-pager. You lose me after one page. So I need you to make your point, state your case, give me the pros, give me the cons. One page. That is very hard. Practice it. You will see. Make your argument in one page. And I stress that, you know, and I tell people, you lose me after 2 to 3 pages, right? Where, you know, everything is so quick, we're so busy. But again, that takes good practice.
I want to assure my students that I did not pay before this presentation for students on the call, because I've said many of these same things. The Googling is very, very prominent during the pandemic. I've seen a spike, and I think maybe people are stressed out and they're wanting to do something quickly. And I've also found with my students, and we actually on May 7th are having a spotlight on student research. So there are students who are actually on this call who've done phenomenal work. So I don't want to say they're not doing great work, but I have struggled sometimes with some of the papers that I do are analysis papers. So they're not research papers. There's what your opinion, support that opinion, back it up. And sometimes the students struggle because they're like, I don't know how to do this. Like, I haven't been asked to do this. And so it's just so rewarding for me as a professor to hear you say that actually is a skill that will be useful to our students. And I wanted to mention, to Vonda's point too, I thought it was interesting, we were talking about being a woman in a leadership role. What I have found too is, so when I was an undergraduate, I went to an amazing school, loved it, had an amazing experience, but I did have a couple of encounters with professors who would be like, well, you know, to be a professor is really a lot of work. It's really a lot of hard work that I was like, okay, then, and some that were amazingly supportive, but it was more explicit sexism, or if I don't even know if that's the right word I want to use, but today I found it more surprising. So it doesn't happen as often, but it still happens. And then I'm just so shocked and surprised by it. So I'm always a little bit taken aback. So I thought that was interesting with Vonda's comment too, where you do still have to navigate some of those conversations sometimes. We do have time for a couple more questions. So if you want to ask them in the chat, I know a lot of people have been talking about their own experiences. So here's one about what museum internship coordinators are looking for in your essays or your transcripts or those sorts of things to make you stand out. I think that's a great question. In addition to it being really well written and not 10 pages, right? And then any advice in the interviews. I think those are some really great questions.
Sure, I'm happy to opine. I think internships are so important. I think they give you insights unlike any other. I was, while I was at Rowan, I was lucky to be part of Mike Donovan's NAPI internship program. The folks who've been around a long time may be familiar with it. It was literally a life-changing experience for me. It really introduced me to the industry. To me, I'll tell you what I look for in internships and what I look for in interns that unfortunately is not reflective in a resume at times. And I try to gauge it in interviews. I look for urgency. I look for students who are, have that desire, want to learn, want to do more, irrespective of, what school they're coming from, their past experience. I look for people who really want to learn, the doers, if you will, and they have that urgency to learn and are interested in the craft. Again, it's the basics. I look for the sheer elements of responsibility. Show me that you've had a job, you were on time, you came in on time, you came early, you stayed late. The sheer just basics. Again, some of these things are hard to gauge in a resume, but you can most certainly gauge in a conversation. And then I do look for your presentation of your person. And that's a reality that unfortunately a lot of people don't care to admit. But, again, I feel like I'm beating up on the younger generations. I don't mean to, but I really do think it's important, in coming to, interview, to ensure that you look professional, to ensure that your speaking skills, that you are speaking professionally. This person's going to represent not just my institution, but quite frankly, anyone that I hire is a reflection of me. And so if I have trust in you to hire you, my expectation is that when you are giving a presentation or where you're engaging and interacting in a business environment, you're a reflection of me. And it really is the case. And so it's important to me that that person reflects not just me well, but the institution as well. But again, I think you can't put urgency in the resume, but having that urgency and having that consistency. Consistency is super important, meaning you're on time every day, not just, when you start, but, throughout your respective career and throughout your respective internship.
So I would say when I'm hiring someone, I really like a letter, really like a good letter. And a lot of people don't send a letter. And a lot of people send a form letter that doesn't have anything to do with the museum or an urgency about why they need a job at a museum. So you can make yourself stand out if you want to. And I just I don't get a letter. I don't really pay attention. It's hard to make your resume stand out without something else, or unless there's something really kind of unique about your life. It doesn't have to be all career related. You can put things that are kind of make you stand out. But, I work with a staff of 7. There's not a lot of people here, and I don't have really a room for a weak link. So you've got an opportunity to show me what you can do right there. And I especially find it annoying if people can't follow directions in the resume process. Like, read what we said and represent that. Like, it's very similar to what you're doing in school. And you think that what your professors have you do is just another assignment. It's preparing you to do this, to be able to get a job, to go to respond to an interview, and to send in what's requested. If you don't do that, honestly, I don't really pay attention to it. I ask people to jump through some hoops. That's how I know what you're going to be like as a staff member to start with. So I learned this recently. I have to say one of my friends taught me this, but it kind of encapsulates what is great to look for. It's the acronym SWAN: somebody who's smart, works hard, is ambitious, and is nice. And those are really things that are valuable. And I can't really say the cheerfulness on the job, somebody who comes in like ready to go, it helps a lot more than you might imagine when you've got a hard day ahead. So those are things that I look for when I'm hiring. And I saw somebody ask for a letter sit with a resume. Yeah, if I usually ask for a cover letter because I want to know a little bit about the person. So yeah, and I do get people who follow up after interviews and send a thank you or something like that, and that's nice. It's nice to get that. It's not absolutely necessary.
You're talking about a letter then that you send in with your resume and all of that as well.
Yeah.
It reminds me of Neil Gaiman. He came to Rowan several years ago, celebrated author. And he has a commencement address where he talks about you need to be a hard worker. To be successful, you need to be a hard worker, you need to be on time, and you need to be nice. And he says 2 out of the 3 will suffice.
If I may, because I think that the subject matter is so important, right? Because this is a center for women, for from a women perspective, if you will, as we're having this conversation, a lot of times I think women can get a bad rap of being too nice, right? Or you are nice, and so then you can't be not nice, which then in some minds might equate to authoritative, the boss, the leader. Can you equate both of them? I have a rule of, and I'm trying to think of the right word because I think you all will get it. I have a no blank rule on my teams. So I think you could fill that in. And I will tell you that it's, we spend 2/3 of our lives with our colleagues, 1/3 of our, if you will, 8 hours a day. If you work 8 hours a day, which we all work much more so than that, it's 1/3 of your life with your colleagues. People want to work with people that they like. It's as simple as that. And it's hard, especially for women, to balance that, being likable, being not likable. But you have to know how to play well with others. I tell people, you have to know how to play well in the sandbox. You have to be cooperative. You can most certainly have disagreement, right? I call it, someone once told me I was pleasantly pushy, and I thought I was like, I'll take that. That's great. But you have to be able to push, and you have to be able to in addition to push, be able to disagree with people agreeably, right? But, not being nice will, people know, right? People will know. And it's so important. There has to be a likability effort there, and a collegialness. Collegialness has to be honed in on you, that you're able to work. You want to be the person that people, want on their team versus the person that they don't.
I want to add to that, that I agree that you can be candid and still nice. You can tell people what they need to hear and still be nice about it. But also you can lift up other women. You can lift up people that you work with, and one of the things that's value is lifting up other people on your staff makes you look good. So, so there's this value in finding balance in sometimes steering people towards what they need, which is not always hard for you to do. And also being the kind of person who's looking to lift up someone else. And I think that when you get to a position where you can do that, that's really a privilege.
And it's also people will, people talk, right? So people want to work for good people. So if you are a strong leader and it's known, it's known that you are, not just a strong leader, but a pleasant person to work with. I hate using the word, but that's what it is, right? You will attract good people to your team. By attracting good people to your team who are hopefully talented, you'll be able to select from the creme of the creme, if you will, which then only makes you a stronger leader. People want to work for good people. If you're working for someone who's not a good leader, people know, they know. And so it's important to keep that in mind. But again, there's ways to do it, and it requires a certain element of self-awareness for sure. But it is possible to be extremely firm, to be extremely direct, to be extremely authoritative, and not be fill in the blank, right? And but still be, approachable, collegial, nice, kind of engaging.
It's so important. I really appreciate that you both brought up the gendered element of that, because it is so true that there is this expectation that you have to be nice because you're a woman, and some people might be threatened by that, but you can be nice and be an authority figure at the same time. They're not mutually exclusive. And again, some students on the call might remember us talking about this in class, where we've talked about sort of sometimes this expectation to be too nice, or you feel like you're being too nice or ingratiating. And even in their papers, I've talked to some of them, because they'll have phrases in their papers where they're like, this might be, or I might, this perhaps could be, like they're using hedging language instead of just saying, this is what I'm arguing, this is what I think. Taking ownership of that. So finding that balance, I think, is really important, or recognizing that that you can be a leader and have opinions and be smart and not have to apologize for it, or not be nice at the same time. You
do have to, at least I did. I had to find my voice. And
yeah.
You have to find the voice that feels authentic to you, but is still doing the job that you have to do. And it is, when you're fundraising, it is not easy. It's
Right.
easy to beat around the bush about what you need, but you have to learn a direct way to finally say, this is what I'm asking you for this much money, or whatever it is. There's a time that comes where you have to let that go.
Absolutely. And I don't want to, by any stretch of the imagination, set an expectation that you're going to come out of college and you're going to have this figured out, because you won't, right? It's going to take quite a bit of time. I'll leave, college students with one phrase that I use over and over again. So kind of telling a little bit of my secret. So hopefully my staff isn't on this, but the one line that I always tell people when I'm in an uncomfortable situation and something's not going right, I say, you know what, this is not working for me. It's as simple as that. It's not aggressive, it's just, this is not working for me, or this is not working, and this is what I need to do to get to where we're in a better place. Very straightforward, it's just not working for me. Especially, from a women perspective in dynamics that might be gendered kind of fueled, if you will. This is just not working for me. And remember to use, it's okay, again, it's okay to disagree. It's okay to not be on the same page as someone. But it's very, very important. And this is hard, and it takes time to on this point. It's very, very important that you are able to call out egregious behavior, call out something that you might disagree with, are not in agreement with, in a professional and collegial manner. The minute that you go to, for on a scale from 1 to 10, that you go to 10, you lose your argument. So it's especially important that you're able to say, you know what, this isn't working for me. This does not work for me, and keep on going. And these are the reasons why. Very, very important, very hard. And you won't figure it out the day after graduation. I promise you that. It's
amazing advice. I think many of the women on this call, and men as well, might take that phrase, this isn't working for me. It's terrific. It's really excellent. We are about out of time, so I just wanted to thank both Julissa and Vonda so much for such an incredibly fascinating, informative, inspirational talk. So I really appreciate all of your insights. I did want to let folks know that on May 7th, we will be having a spotlight on student research. We have some students who will be talking about images of gender in advertisements that they have written. And so I would invite you to that. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't remind you that on May 20th, Dr. Copenhaver is being honored for Rowan University's Lifetime Service Award. So the link for that is in the chat. Again, thank you so much to both of you. A wonderful conversation, and we appreciate everyone's support of the program today. I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
A lot of fun. Thank you all.
Okay, bye.
Can you stop recording now, Karen? Thank you.